One of the challenges of being a category creator is that you need to take a different view of politics. Now, as we have talked to a whole number of these folks that have created these breakthrough new products, almost all of them talk about a point in their career where they had what they called the naive view of politics. And that naive view of politics tended to have these kind of characteristics, that they thought invention was sufficient, that there was an intrinsic value in the innovation, and that managers and others in the organization ought to be able to recognize that intrinsic value and act on those insights. And that the innovator's tasks were complete once the product is developed or once the concept is formed. That couldn't be further from the truth. As I've mentioned before in some other little clips that I've done, is that most of the organization, I would say 98% plus of the organization, is focused on maintaining the status quo, running today's business. If you think about all the people in the organization, all the development projects, all the manufacturing people, sales, quality assurance, everybody else is about producing today's products or maybe improving today's products. So if you think about that somebody's going to say, I've got this revolutionary product and it's coming down the line, and that the organization is going to be just anxiously waiting for my new invention, that is a very naive view of politics in organizations and what it takes to have a successful invention and innovation. Now, what happens is most of these people talked about a time in their life when they crossed the bridge, where they said, I went from this naive view that it was somebody else's responsibility to say it was my responsibility, to where I formed a willingness to convince the organization that it was my job to go do that I needed to convince there. So the innovator now becomes willing to engage the rest of the organization. As they engage the rest of the organization, they apply their creative problem-solving abilities to the political task. And that is, they start saying, okay, what's the context here? What am I going to need to do to move this organization? How do I analyze it? How do I think about moving it? What needs to happen to be able to move this organization to accept the innovation that I've created? And then it's an interesting piece around this, that it's not just one person but many. So often, again, in that naive view, if I can just convince my manager, then we can be able to go sell it. Most of the time the managers will say, I'm convinced, we got to convince the rest of the organization. So you've got to be able to help that next person be able to convince the rest of the organization. Now, it's many people, and almost all of them will come from the problem from a very different perspective than you do. They will be outside your comfort zone. So if you think about managers or executives, they're going to be thinking about and working on different kinds of issues than you've been thinking about and working on, and how do you position the product and your innovation in a way that they're going to be able to hear it. So they're going to be outside your comfort zone, they're going to be coming at it from a different way, and they're going to have a different set of priorities. So all of that is the task. Now, as we think about this willingness to convince, what it does is it puts an onus of responsibility back on the innovator that says, I'm going to deliver results in spite of the situation. That once I've understood this and created this thing and know that it's appropriate for my customers and everything else, then there's nothing I can do except get it accepted in the organization. And it's never a project until it's politically accepted. My colleagues and I have worked on this and say every project has two elements. One's the technical, one's the political side, and you've got to be able to work both of those equally well. Facts aren't enough. You've got to be able to sell. So the facts are important, the facts are critical, they'll come back to be very useful to us, but they're not sufficient. You've got to be able to sell, and you've got to be able to sell in a way that fits your style. You're going to sell differently than I will. You'll sell differently than your colleague down the hall. But the important is that you've got to be able to say, how do I sell and what do I need to do that? But most importantly is part of your selling process is having a positive pathway to move forward. So how do we take the next step is part of the sell. If you sell the whole end picture, you're probably not going to be completely successful. You've got to be able to sell the next step, and we're going to be able to move forward, and then here's the steps that might come after that. This challenge of the politics is an interesting challenge, and you may think about it, And say, as you're working on things, if you ever hear yourself or your colleagues say something like, it's all politics, you know that they haven't crossed from that naive view to the willingness to convince. So analyze yourself, look at yourself, and say, have I engaged in this? Am I willing to go work the organization and work the political side almost as hard or as hard as I have worked the technical side?